really embraced it in Appalachia, but it's an old art. It started out where we just took, quilters took fabric they had, such as outgrown children's clothes. That's how it started, is a necessity. Families providing for their families with what they had. Then it turned into an art form because people decided to take these pieces of fabric and pretty colors that went well together and put them into designs. And so then it morphed into an art form. And I've heard people say, why in the world would you take fabric, cut the fabric into pieces, and then sew the pieces back together? It's because it's an art form. And so there's a whole lot more to it than just creating a blanket or something to keep yourself warm.
I remember I was 3 or 4 years old. I'd be at my grandmother's house, and she was a quilter. So she would set me in a chair, and she had this, it's not a desk, it's like a table, but fits over your chair, and I still have it. And she'd set me there, and she'd give me a piece of fabric, and then she would give me what we call a template. It's just whether it's a square or a diamond or whatever shape you wanted. And I would sit there, and she'd give me a pencil, and I would sit there with that piece of cardboard, and I'd put it on the fabric, and then you just draw the design on the fabric, and you might have 50 of them on one piece of fabric. Then you'd take a pair of scissors, and you'd cut each one of those little designs out.
Any quilter you talk to, they'll talk about working on their top. This is a top, and the top is simply the design first layer. So when I get ready to quilt this, I'll take this and I'll get what's called batting, which is an interior filler, and I'll put that behind this, and then I'll use backing, which is typically, people are starting to put designs in their backing now, some, but typically it's a solid piece of fabric. And then you can either hand quilt it, and there's guidelines on the batting, like some of the battings will say 4 inches, meaning that the stitches have to be within 4 inches of each other, either direction, in order to keep it from bunching up when it's laundered. But a lot of people are doing machine quilting now. We do machine quilting for speed. We can put out a whole lot more quilts when we machine quilt them. A long arm quilting machine is a machine that's designed to do specifically the quilting. And it's got a great big old frame. It's like 12 feet long, and it takes time to do it. Then they're computerized, and so you can set the design, give it its parameters, and then tell it what to do, and it just does it. The purpose of the quilting, this quilting is called stippling. The purpose of this quilting on here is to unite the top with the back with the batting. It's holding it all together. So now when I launder this, it's not going, it might shrivel a little bit, and that's one of the characteristics of quilts that I personally prefer. I mean, I love my quilt after it's been laundered. And the more you wash them, the softer they get. And you get that quilty look where it's kind of just a little crinkly. And that's what this quilting will do, is it holds it in place so that that crinkling can occur. When that's done, it'll look something like this. And this is a completed quilt that has the backing on it. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is white on white. It's got tiny little stars on it. So it's a white fabric. And this design is called stippling. Stippling is just a random design, that all over design, that's easy to use because it's, you don't have to, you can kind of just fit it in there, and you don't have to match it up. It all just goes. And so then after it's quilted, you get this. And the next part of the process with something like this is to bind it, because you can't hand this over to somebody with these raw edges and and use it. And so then we do binding. But that's when you take fabric and stitch it on here. Actually, it gets stitched on here. It's stitched down on one side, then it's turned and stitched down again on the other side. And that gives you a finished edge so that the quilt has a nice even edge on it. And then that finishes the quilt. And this is called Irish chain. The reason it's called Irish chain is because of these diagonal lines, squares. But we'll use all kinds of different patterns. Some of them are more traditional. This is a pattern. And these blocks will be put together. They can be put together with what's called sashing. And sashing, an example of sashing is like this red stripe here. It can be put together with sashing, or they can be put together directly to touching one another, and where they're put together like this. So it's fun, it's fun to just explore the creativity factor, see what you can do with it. I've taken this one right here as an example of one where I've taken the same pattern over and over and over again and put it together in different colorways and come up with a different design every time I've done it. And this is a traditional design called, some people call it Lone Star, and it looks way more complicated than it truly is.
Like the Lone Star, that's the way they used to be made. You would take those and you would cut out each diamond singly. And of course now we have rotary cutters and all the equipment that you need, the rulers and those things to make all these designs. So instead of drawing that, like I said, on an old piece of cardboard, now you have plastic templates that you can get, and most people, I don't even think use templates anymore because you use your rotary cutters, at least for a lot of the simple designs. And you can cut 4 layers of fabric and do a strip, and then like for those, then you cut an angle on those, and you can do 60 of them in 5 minutes. So it's much quicker now. We're not sewing by lamplight and doing it after we've fixed dinner and hoed the garden and put the kids to bed and those kinds of things.
This is a 9-patch, meaning 3 rows of 3 blocks. But a lot of quilting is set up in 9-patch. This one, it takes strips. The strips are all sewn together. They're 2.5-inch strips, which quilters know as jelly rolls. And they're sewn together in long strips and then cut in blocks. And then a process called snowballing, which is where you take a square and sew it on the corners of the block, and so it makes a circle out of it. Creates the block. That's the block right there. And then those blocks get sewn together, butted up against each other, no sashing. And so that makes that one. Here's the Lone Star, smaller version, put together, multiples. This is another one that from our Quilt Guild, we did Block of the Month of stars. And I took those 12 months of stars and put it together with sashing. And these are called cornerstones. This is sashing, this is cornerstone. Put it together with cornerstones and created a quilt of valor. But look at the difference between this one and then this one. And then these are all the same pattern. And then this one. But they don't look alike. I mean, they look a little bit alike. But the past 4 you saw were all the same pattern. And see, they look very different, even though they're all using the same pattern. One of the things you might say is you say, now wait a minute, might be the same pattern, but they're not the same size. So you look at this one, and it's a whole lot smaller than that one. And that one is smaller than this one. But what accounts for that, the reason that is when you look at this one's what we call a 2x2, meaning there's 1, 2, 1, 2 in this diamond. This one is a 6x6 or 5x5. It's a 5x5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's put 5 different. And so, of course, it's going to be a 5x5 is going to be a whole lot bigger than a 2x2. But that can still be used to put together to make a quilt. This is called a pinwheel, and these are put together with triangles, square triangles. And this one It complicates it. It looks more complicated because of the sashing and this printed fabric makes it look more complex than a solid would. They're different from blankets because, I take my blanket out and take my grandsons out. I'm going to read them a book under a tree, and I lay it on the grass. Well, a blanket will pick up grass or bugs or whatever. A quilt, you kind of just shake it out. And as I said before, the more you wash them, the softer they get. So if it does get something on it, just wash it. They're designed to be washed. The fabric we use is quality fabric, and it's supposed to be washed. It improves it as it's washed.
I can remember my grandmother and my mother taking me when I was really little to the traditional quilting bee. It was in one of the neighbors' houses. This was probably back in the 50s. And there was probably, they had 2 quilts set up, and there were probably 15 or 20 women, and they brought in dinner, whether you were having beans and cornbread or, whatever you were having, you couldn't call for takeout. So, and then you would have all these women around this quilting frame, and everybody was sewing.
I've been quilting for, goodness, 40 years probably. Sometimes somebody will cut, somebody else will press. I mean, it's kind of a joint affair sometimes. We don't just make the quilt top. We usually do, but sometimes there's 2 or 3 people working on the same thing, and it works good. And we get a lot of ideas from each other and brainstorming about how to fix this mistake you've made or what colors go good together. That's what we're working on down there on the floor, and just, it's camaraderie to me.